Okay, the sixth input output organization 2023 in a vectored interrupt. The interrupt source supplies the branch of information to the processor. One separate memory address is role allocated received for an each interrupt in IVT. Input and output organization. A read bit can be read by a CPU and written by a peripheral. Okay. A read bit can be read in by a CPU and written by the peripheral. The read and write functionality depends on the type of microcontroller peripheral. Generally, the status bits have a read-only status and can be modified by peripherals only. An interrupt in which the external devices supplies its addresses as well as the interrupt request is known as vectored interrupt. Same ఇదే అనుకుంటా ఇండియన్ వెక్టార్ సేమ్ ఇదే మళ్ళీ 2023లో కూడా వచ్చినట్టుంది. ఈ క్వశ్చన్ 2023లో కూడా వచ్చినట్టుంది. And a vector interrupt is an input-output interrupt that tells the computer that handles I/O interrupts at the software or hardware level that a request for an attention from an input-output devices have been received and also identifies the device that set the request. An interrupt that can be disabled or ignored by the instructions of a CPU is called maskable interrupt. The interrupts are either edge triggered or level triggered or level triggered and RST6, RST7, RST6.5, RST7.5, RST5.5 of 8085. An interrupt that cannot be disabled or ignored by the instructions of a CPU is called non-maskable interrupt. TRAPS 8085. The ability to temporarily halt the CPU and use this time to send information on buses is called cycle stealing. The ability of temporarily halt the CPU and use this time to send the information buses is called cycle stealing. Cycle stealing mode is similar to the burst transfer mode, but instead of data being transferred all at once, it is transferred by one bit at a time. The DMA controller, after transferring one byte of a data, release control of a system of buses by sending a bus grant signal through a controlled bus. Polling is not a hardware mechanism, it is a protocol in which the CPU steadily checks whether the device needs attention. A vectored interrupt is an I/O interrupt that tells the computer that handles I/O interrupts at the software or hardware level that a request for attention from an input-output devices has been received and also identifies the devices that sent the request. The device which is used to connect a peripheral bus is known as interface. Interface is a device which is used to connect a peripheral to a bus. A communication protocol is a system of rules that allows two or more entities of a communications systems to transmit information. The protocols define the rules, syntax, cinematics, and synchronization of the communication and possible error recoverable methods. A control register is a processor registers which changes or controls the general behavior of a CPU or other devices. Common task performed by a control registers include interrupt control, switching and addressing mode, paging control, or co-processor control. Fifth one, the trap is one of the interrupts available in Intel 8085. Which of the following statements is true or trap? Is both positive and negative edge triggered? Fifth one, markable interrupts are those which can be disabled or ignored by the microprocessors. These interrupts are either edge triggered or level triggered, so they can be disabled. INTR, RST 7.5, RST 6.5, RNT 5.5 are maskable interrupts in the 8085 microprocessor. Non-maskable interrupts are those which cannot be disabled or ignored by a microprocessor. TRAP trap is a non-maskable interrupt. It consists of both levels as well as edge triggered and is used in a critical power failure conditions. Which of the following need not necessarily be saved on a context switch between processors? Translation, look aside buffer. A TLT stores the recent translations of virtual memory to a physical memory and can be called an addressed translation cache. A translation look aside buffer TLB is a memory cache that is used to reduce the time taken to a process to access a user memory location. It is a part of the chip memory management unit MMU. We don't need to save TLB or cache to ensure the correct program resumption. They are just beneficial but not necessary, but the PC stake and register must be saved, otherwise the program cannot resume. Seventh one, which of the following statements about the synchronous and asynchronous input operation is not true? In both synchronous and asynchronous input operations, an ISR interrupt service routine is invoked after completion of the input output operation. Seventh one, and in an asynchronous input output process, performing an input output operation is placed in a blocked state until the input output operation is complete. An ISR is invoked after completion of IO operation and it places the process from the block state to ready state. ISR వచ్చేసి బ్లాక్ స్టేట్ నుంచి రెడీ స్టేట్కి పంపిస్తుంది. అండ్ asynchronous input output the handler function is registered while performing an IO operation. The process is not placed in the block state and the process continues to execute the remaining instructions. When IO operation is completed, the signal mechanism is used to notify the process that data is available. On receiving an interrupt from an input output device, the CPU branches of the interrupt service routine after completion of the current instruction. The CPU checks the status of interrupt at the completion of a current instruction running. When there is an interrupt, it services the interrupt using ISR. On receiving an interrupt from an input output device, the CPU branches off to the interrupt service routine after completion of the current instruction. What is the raw throughput of USB 2.0 technology? 480 Mbps. The USB 3.0 super speed path operates at a raw bit rate of 5 gigabytes, while the USB 2.0 path operates at 480 mbits high speed, 12 mbits at full speed, 1.5 bits at low speed. And ninth one, two control signals in a microprocessors which are related to direct memory access DMA or hold and HLDA. The DMA controlled sends a hold request line to the CPU and waits for the CPU to assert the HLDA. INTR is a maskable interrupt having low priority. One or more interrupt pin is INTA called interrupt acknowledgement. RND, WR are for reading and writing data respectively. S0, S1 are the output signals used to give information of an operation performed by a microprocessor. The S0 and S1 lines specify 4 different conditions of 8085 machine lines. A processor is a fetching instruction at the rate of 1 MIPS. A DMA module is used to transfer characters to RAM from a device transmitting a 9600 bps. How much time will the processor be slowed down due to DMA activity? 1.2 milliseconds. The external device The external devices sends the data to DMA module in 1 second, that is equals to 9600 bits. 9600 bits divided by 8 is equals to 1200 bytes. The number of instructions processor can run in 1 second is 1 million, that is 10 to the power of 6, because 1 MIBPS means 1 million instructions per second. So the time processor is slowed down due to DMA activity, that is equals to 1200 by 10 to the power of 6, that is equal to 0.0012 seconds, that is equals to 1.2 milliseconds. DMA transfer schema. The transfer schema in other than burst mode is cycle stealing technique. The following condition techniques are used in a DMA. 1. Cycle steal. A read or write cycle signal is generated by the DMAC, and the output device and input output device IO device either generates a latches the data. DMAC effectively steal the cycle from the processor in order to transfer the byte. So signal byte transfer, also known as cycle stealing. Bus transfer. To achieve the block transfer, some DMACs incorporate an automatic sequence of the value presented on an address bus. A register is used as a byte count, being decremented for each time transfer, and upon the byte count reaching 0 on DMAC will release the bus. When the DMAC operates in the burst mode, the CPU is halted for the duration of the data transfer. Hidden DMA. It is possible to perform hidden DMA, which is transparent to the normal operations of the CPU. In other words, the bus is grabbed by the DMAC when the processor is not using its DMAC monitors the execution of the processor, and when the recognizes the processor executing an instructions which has sufficient empty clock cycles to perform a byte transfer, it awaits till the processor is decoding the OP code, then grabs the bus during this time. The processor is not slowed down but continues processing normally. Naturally, the data transfer by the DMAC must be completed before the processor starts. On the 12th అయిపోయింది. IEEE 1394 is related to firewire. ఫైర్వైర్కి సంబంధించింది 1394 అనమాట. IEEE 1394 firewire is an interface standard for a serial bus of high-speed communications and a real-time data transfer. It provides a single plug and stock connection on which up to 63 devices can be attached with the data transfer speeds up to 400 to 800 Mbps. 14th in 8085 microprocessor, the ISR for handling trap interrupt is at which location? 24 Hz. Vector interrupts are those which have a fixed vector addresses, starting addresses of a subroutine, and after executing these programs, control is transferred to that address. Vector addresses are calculated by the formula 8 into type TYPE type. Okay, that is RST in vector addresses n into 8 10 in decimal. We convert n into 8 10 into hexadecimal. Interrupt in vector address in decimal, vector address in hex. Trap RST 4.5 ki 4 into 5 into 8, 4.5 into 8 is 36 of 10, 24 Hz. RST 5.5 ki 5.5 into 8, 44 of 10, that is equals to 2 Ch. RST 6.5 ki 6.5 into 8 into 52 decimal is 34 Hz. తర్వాత RST H.7.5 ki 7.5 into 8 is equals to 60 of 10. 3 CH software interrupts vector addressing are given by interrupt RST 0 into 8, that is equals to 00 of 10, 00 H. Okay, RST 1 ki 1 into 8, 0 of 8 is of 10, that is equal to 0.8 Hz. RST 2 ki 2 into 8, 16 is equals to 10 Hz. 3 into 8, that is equals to 18 Hz. 4 into 8, 32, 20 Hz. 5 into 8, 28 Hz. 6 into 8, 30 Hz. 7 into 8, 38 Hz. So that it is equals to 24 Hz anamata. దీనికి ఇంకా ఇక్కడ 24H ఇక్కడ వచ్చేసింది చూడు. ట్రాప్స్ 4.5 RSTకి వచ్చేసి 24H ఇక్కడ ఉంది. Which interrupt is a 8085 microsoftware is unmaskable trap? An interrupt that can be disabled or ignored by the instruction of a CPU is called maskable interrupts. The interrupts are either edge triggered or level triggered or level triggered. ఇక్కడ ఏమైనా డిఫరెంట్ ఉందో నాకు అర్థం కాదు. ఎగ్జాంపుల్ RST 6.5, RST 7.5, RNC 5.5, 8085. An interrupt that cannot be disabled or ignored by the instructions of a CPU is called a non-maskable interrupt. Trap 8085. రిపీట్ అయింది. 15th క్వశ్చన్ ట్రాప్ది ఇది రిపీట్ అయింది ఇక్కడ. మళ్ళా మళ్ళీ ఇక్కడ సేమ్ క్వశ్చన్ రిపీట్ అయింది కదా. ఇక్కడ ఇది రిపీట్ అయిందా? సర్లే. SATA ఈజ్ అన్ అబ్రివేషన్ ఆఫ్ సీరియల్ అడ్వాన్స్డ్ టెక్నాలజీ అటాచ్మెంట్. లాస్ట్లో అటాచ్మెంట్ అనేది చూడు. శాంటాకి లాస్ట్లో అటాచ్మెంట్ అని వస్తుంది చూడు. సీరియల్ అడ్వాన్స్డ్ టెక్నాలజీ అటాచ్మెంట్. Of the following, which best categorize a computer that uses memory mapped input-output ports are placed at the addresses on the bus and are accessed just like the other memory locations. Idi correct vastadi. The computer provides a serial instructions for manipulating input-output ports అని ఉంది. చూద్దామండి. లేదు ఉత్త B ఒకటే. ఎందుకంటే మెమరీ మ్యాప్డ్ ఇన్పుట్ అవుట్పుట్ యూజెస్ as the same addresses space to address both memory and input output devices. The memory and registers of the input output devices are mapped into associated with the addresses values. So when an address is accessed by the CPU, it may prefer to a portion of the physical RAM. Memory mapped input output versus memory input output mapped into IO. Input output mapped input output IO. Memory mapped IO versus IO mapped IO. Memory mapped IO, a method to perform an input-output operation or input-output operations between the central processing unit CPU and peripheral devices in a computer that uses one address space for a memory and output devices. A method to perform input-output IO operations between the central processing unit CPU and a peripheral devices in a computer that uses the two separate addresses spaces for the memory and input-output devices. Uses of the same addresses space for both memory and input-output devices. Use the two separate addresses spaces for memory and input-output devices. As a memory mapped input-output uses one addresses, the space for both input and output memory, the available addresses for memory are minimum. All the addresses can be used by a memory. Uses the same instructions for both input and memory operations. Uses separate instructions for read and write operations in input, output and memory. Less efficient, more efficient. IO mapped IO is more efficient than memory mapped IO. So input output ports and placed at the addresses on the buses and are accessed just like a memory locations.